All right, someone was asking about a COH arena large scale PvP tier list. So these are the poorly cropped icons, and we can go down the list. Uh, Dark Blast, mm, B tier, maybe C tier. It's not good. It has Moonbeam as a snipe. That's the only thing good about it. The Dark Hold has some weird projectile timing you can do, but its recharge is too long. So only okay, not great, not terrible. Dark Menisma, don't bother. Nothing good about it. Devices, probably A tier. Webs are still annoying, and it lets you skip tactics, so you can take Fly on a blaster, which Fly is just really, really good. Probably not S tier, just because you don't have an absorb shield with it, which increases your max HP. Dominate, I have just Dominate the power, like for all the epics and stuff. This used to be like S tier, the best power in the game, but they reduced or increased the recharge from 16 seconds to 24, which you would hope would go to A, but it's probably B tier now just because it can't keep up with the spike window of even like moderate pacing. It used to be able to be your second attack in like all kinds of different chains, but now it just recharges too long. Dual pistols, for actual offense, C tier. For support utility, you can double slot the absorb proc in this on your support characters like Pain and Empathy and Elec. We'll call it A tier, but it is just I think like one of the strongest things to play as a support character second, and then you can slot up execution or shot if you want to try to get a little damage on target. I guess the reason it's not S tier because it has no pet disruption. Elect Blast, it's a lot of blast sets you don't see on here, and the reason is all they bring is usually a snipe, which the recharge is a little too long to do like fast paced spike teams, and it's just the one power in the set. It doesn't bring anything else, and snipes are pretty much standardized across the board. Like they're pretty high damage attacks. Their hit timing varies from hit scan to decently fast. Like Alex is a hit scan, so you can use it as a second attack, but you can't really use this as an opener. So we'll say Elec, probably C tier. Sapping is also bad in 8v8s for the most part because you're going to have. You don't want to get into counter picking without like some sort of weird system set up that we just don't have the population to do. So you don't want to bring something that forces someone to counter pick you. You just kind of want to play a more homogenized thing. So we'll put Elec in C tier. Not great. It has basically zap, and that's it. Elec support would be S tier at the highest level, whenever you have one Emp, one Elec. But for kickballs and stuff like that, A or B tier, it just doesn't have the same healing potential as Empathy and Pain. It also doesn't have Clear Mind, so it puts all the pressure on the other Emp. Your job is more like to get the Absorb Shield on after targets are spiked, and get them back up to as much HP as possible so they can't be reset on. But yeah, it is like the highest level when people are Johnning and phasing early and everything like that, and you're running absorb cap teams. It's the best of the best. For kickball, probably B tier. Empathy, gotta have them. Everyone runs them. It has the two ranged heals. Absorb Pain is a metric ton of healing, so you can actually heal through the crazy damage on spikes. Heal Other is a pretty fast heal that activates fast into its animation, even though it has a longer animation. It's like 227. Pain will basically cut around and say S tier because it's basically the same as Emp. It's tier 9 is worse. Adrenaline Boost is better than Painbringer, but Pain has the ticking health thing up all the time, so it kind of helps when people are roguing and chipping you. The Res Shield is probably more useful for forts in the gather meta, whereas Fortitude, if you're not gathering a lot, is just more useful to put on like your offensive members who need a little to hit buff, especially if people are playing poison and stuff like that. But yeah, like you're always gonna have two of these on any kickball team. Energy Blast, C tier. The snipe is fine. It's kind of the same thing as Elec. It brings the snipe to the table. If you want to be a cheese ball and try to knock people back, it has a knockback power, but that's just one power you're not doing damage with. Yeah, don't bother for the most part. But if you're really hung up on the cool look of energy blast, you can basically do snipe into a hit scan like strangler or dominate or something like that. Energy manipulation for blasters. I think the range is pretty much overkill. That's all it brings is power boost and boost range. We're getting nature, or no, what's it called, marine affinity soon, which gives your entire team boost range. So it goes from not great to just don't even bother as soon as marine affinity comes out. Right now, it's like you can only run fire blast with it because, or any, you can only run sets that have self-contained spikes in it. Where it's like you can do like blaze into blazing bolt. You have no follow-ups from energy, so it's pretty bad. Fire blast S tier. It's the only super viable 1-2 punch set right now for 8v8 PvP, and that's the way spikes usually work. Is you fire one fast animating attack that has a reasonable projectile speed, the speed's around 90, into a near hit scan or hit scan power. In this case, it's Blaze into Blazing Bolt, and they basically hit before the 2.2 second mark, which is the magic time for heals, and it's just the best at what it does. It makes the cleanest spikes. And the thing is, why it's S tier is every AT can use it. Corruptors, blasters, dominators, defenders less so because it just doesn't have a lot of procs, but you can still technically use it. Defenders are usually going to be your lead debuffers, so you only need one attack plus a debuff for defenders, whereas corruptors, like you're going to be your natures and stuff like that, you're going to need two attacks. I just put this out here. Fly is S tier now as far as movement control, controlling your fall distances, being able to chase people who are high up to avoid it, and Fly has minus fly protection from the one IO, and if you take evasive maneuvers, you can actually resist, I think, like one or two minus fly effects like web grenades and stuff like that. And as annoying as they are, it lets you maintain verticality, which is important in PvP. Force field, don't bother. It's kind of the clown set. You know, if you're knockbacking, you're basically telling people, hey, let me force people to PvE and make a second build with knockback protection. It's really bad. The shields don't do anything for the most part. With nature buffs and everything, you're already to hit capped, and the defense isn't going to matter. Fossilize I have here less so than Earth as far as like a control set goes, but just the power fossilize because you can get it in a couple different areas, including Earth control. I put an A tier. It procs better than a lot of the holds because of the longer animation, but the longer animation also makes it not as favorable. I will put it in B tier. It's okay. It procs decent, but it animates long and it hangs long, so it's not as fluid as Dominate. But because you can run Dominate, or you can run Fossilize on Dominators, it actually is a little bit better. Whereas Dominate on Dominators, its recharge is almost a little too low, so it doesn't proc well. Gravity control, A tier. It's got the little gravity bubble. It lets you gather safely. The pet's a little targeting disruption, but that's pretty much the only two powers you use it for. If you want to be a cheese ball again, you can lift people, but not great. Hibernate, the fastest way to cut off all damage from a spike. You either want this or phase shift in almost every build, because basically 2 or 3 times a match, if not 3 or 4, it'll let you completely cut your damage off and give your imp some breathing room. Ice Blast used to be S tier, best spike in the game was Bitter Ice Blast Dominate by a wide margin. Each power takes 5 procs, so you do 1 act damage, IO, either a Hameo or a Gladjav act damage, and then 5 damage procs in it. And because it had a 12-second recharge, you could slot the ATO procs and not hurt it too bad. Or you could just slot 5 procs and slam out like more damage in any two spike window. Now, I mean, you got to put it with B tier because it paired with Dominate. I guess you could put it A tier. So B tier for Corruptors, Defenders. It's still the most damage you can do. It basically makes Corruptors and Defenders do blaster level range damage, but they just can't keep pace. So it's like if you do a spike, you're going to do Bitter Ice Blast Dominate, and the next target's going to come up, and you're only going to have Bitter Ice Blast for it. You're not going to have a follow up. That's not great. But for blasters who have Strangler and Shocking Bolt, it's A tier. Maybe even we won't call it S tier, just because it doesn't fit all around. But we'll leave it in A tier because blasters have follow up attacks for it to follow on every spike, and it still hits like a truck. Illusion, S tier. Pet Disruption is still amazing. Basically, you run at a high level. You run 2 ill imps in a non-elect meta. Elects are always defenders as far as that goes because you need the extra value from the absorb. As far as EBs go, you're not as worried about the heal value because you still have AP to really top people off, and you have heal other for your fast heal. Illusion has Phantasm, which spawns a second pet, and then it has Phantom Army, which spawns 3, and then you can slot the controller ATO in the weird little fear power that spawns a pet. So you have basically a mastermind's worth of pet without playing a useless character that is a mastermind. We'll get to that soon. Jaunt, S tier. This is just one of those ones like get yourself a jaunt straight up bind and then a jaunt to camera bind, so you can use like directional movements. You can get around the map much better. You can get yourself high verticality if you start out in bad positioning. It's a good way to break spikes whenever people are using like longer attack chains. Just one of the probably the best movement power in the game. Kinetics, I'll say A tier. It's a little niche. IR makes everything smoother. Speed boost lets you run spikes at a faster pace. So whenever people ran the all corruptor defender teams, you ran Bitter Ice Blast Dominate, and you ran a kin to keep their attack chains going as fast as possible. So whenever you would gather, you would hit them with speed boost and IR, and the movement speed, the movement control and IR is really good for PvP. But for kickball, probably B tier. You're not gathering as much. You don't have a self heal. And yeah, it's just you're not getting as much utility. But I'm still leaving an A because Kid's fun. Martial blasters and B tier, like they get a second jaunt. Like if you're someone who uses a lot of jaunt powers and are running out of them, the jaunt or this power gives you 3 more. But that's literally the only thing in this set. It gives you like that weird break free thing, which used to be more viable before Clear Mind. Now it's definitely a lot more niche. But, if you brought one and you brought like a self-contained blaster set like Fire, no one's going to complain. Masterminds, don't bother. Realistically, they're probably C tier. You just run around with a bunch of pets and act as a disruption character, but you're not doing very much when it comes to spikes and stuff like that in a realistic manner. People play too vertical now where you're stuck in bodyguard mode. So yeah, you're basically targeting disruption. Like you're making it harder for the other team to lock, but you're doing it by existing. You're not doing it by anything like massively skillful. Like running around hitting people with knockout blow isn't gonna like make or break anything. It's gonna be late on the spike anyway. That goes for pretty much all masterminds. Like Thugs brings the most pets. The to hit buffs from Necromancy don't matter. The demons bring minor minus res, but it's like you're getting your minus res from other sources on an actual spike target. Yeah. Nature, S tier. If there's a tier above S tier, it'd probably be Nature. It's the S plus tier. You can't run too many of them. They give you a massive absorb shield where one of them caps your entire, one of them gives you about 730-ish odd absorb, and then the entomb proc will usually cap your character the rest of the way. So you only need one nature to gather plus an entomb proc to pretty much cap yourself out unless you're a blaster. But a blaster has usually a ticking absorb shield and entomb proc, so they can kind of proc themselves or top themselves that way. It also brings overgrowth, massive to hit buff, and massive damage buff, so it caps everybody's damage for about 1 minute, and if you do 1 minute gathers, you have these buffs perma as long as you don't die. It's also why you play Elec is whenever you get spiked, you have the 1,000 extra hit points from this, and then the elect will hit you with this, which is about 700 more. And if you're getting pressured a lot, they'll also hit you with Spirit Ward, and that'll take you back up to absorb cap. So instead of having 1606 or 1847 hit points, you have like 2600, which back in old PvP is like unthinkable to think that you'd have a defender or corruptor running around with 2600 HP. But we also do more damage now. Oh, nature also has, it's like a niche as a debuffer for defenders. The values is not as good as rad or poison. The debuffs aren't as good as poison, but it is like a set that does everything. For kickball, I personally run a water nature because it doesn't, rad is kind of hard to play in kickball. Like you animate for long periods of time and you need a little bit of babysitting. You need very fast reaction times and you need to hope that you don't get caught in animation. Nature water lets you kind of circumnavigate that. You have a faster activating debuff, but it does have a travel time, so closer to the target is better, whereas if you're far away it'll come in too late in the spike. But everything works out. It has a good recharge time on the debuff. The buffs are amazing, and it has probably the best self-heal out of anything in the game because one cast gets you so much value with the tick heal over time. Self-sufficient, good debuffs, amazing team buffs, S plus tier, but we don't have that. Ninjutsu blasters. I'm gonna say somewhere between A and B tier. You're basically taking to run like they may it's there's two things the set has. It has the choking powder power, which isn't good. It's just a proc mule. You can basically 5-proc it. But it has a shorter range, and the recharge time is only okay. But what it lets you do is it lets you fire a floaty attack into a hit scan attack. Like dominate your hit scans, everything from Seismic Blast is hit scan, Blazing Bolt is near hit scan. So what it allows you to do is it allows you to fire your first floaty attack and then use pretty much any other blast set that has a hit scan attack in it. Because what you'll do is did I have Char? Perfect. We'll put it right up here. So these two together let you make niche blasters that wouldn't otherwise work because you have two floaty attacks. And each of them, you need them to like keep the recharge up. So you can go actually a really fast pace. Like one spike will be choking powder into a hit scan, which would be like earth snipe, and then your next one would be like char into entomb. And it's a 1-2 punch that you can do in like 2 targets in rapid succession. You'll always have attacks up. That's kind of the idea with blasters is they have more versatile chains, whereas like defenders and corruptors are pretty much limited to their 1-2 attacks. But yeah, we'll say A tier. It gives a lot of versatility. The other thing it has is it doesn't have an absorb shield, so that makes it a little weaker. This power does take an entomb proc, which is really nice. And it's a dot, so that's also kind of a strike against it. But in the limited world of what's viable and what's not, this is like a power that makes a lot more things viable. It also has a chance for crit in its passive. I think it's like, does it replace build up? I think it replaces build up. But whatever it is, it's like it adds another proc on attacks with like a semi decent chance. So that's good. Like it's not as good as Toxins. Toxins is still the strongest, but this power's like build up equivalent isn't terrible. It actually brings something to the table beyond flat damage, and that's good because when you're running natures, you're already near capped on damage if you've got enough of them. Phase shift. Moving on to phase shift, S tier. It's one of those ones you either take phase or hibernate or both if some builds allow it. You get like narrow windows. If you're being hyper pressured, being able to hive the first spike and then if they come back to you 10 seconds later, being able to phase the next one is really good. Most builds don't allow for this. It's usually only like defender debuffers that could kind of allow for double phase. Emps can do it too. But usually, as an Emp, you don't want to be pressured that much because pressuring the offense is just better. Plant. I want to call it S tier because it is just straight up the best blaster secondary. It has Toxins, which is the best build-up power because you get the chance for build-up procs. You're basically getting the damage anyway. And like we said, plus damage doesn't quite as matter as much with nature. And Toxins gives you a fiery embrace style buff. It doesn't quite respect final damage like Fiery Embrace, but it gives you a flat proc based on the power's animation time. And with that in mind, it has Strangler, which is a hit scan, early fire into animation, hold type power for Blaster. So it takes 5 procs. It's mainly dot, but it still does it still does a ton of dot damage. So like it's it doesn't do it up front, which would be ideal, but it might force extra greens out of characters if you don't kill them. So it's like kind of a resource burner. But the fact that you can 5 proc it, it doesn't need to do amazing base damage or upfront damage. But those two combined make it definitely the go-to blaster secondary. The only reason it's probably not S tier is because this has like a full almost 2.07, like 2.1 second animation. So it's going to hard reach you. And the idea is like Bitter Ice Blast Dominate or Blaze Dominate is a 1 second attack into a 1 second attack, 1.1. So you're basically already evading at the end of the second attack. Whereas you're animating this attack, you're always going to take 2 attacks. Whereas in like if you're animating Blaze, you can break off halfway through the spike before they fire the second attack off. But blasters are tankier. They do have more hit points. They tend to more hit points. They have higher value greens and they have a higher absorb cap. So it kind of works itself out being really strong. But like we won't call it S tier because it isn't the highest level. But I guess for kickball we'd call it S tier. But I'm still gonna leave it in A tier. Psy Blast. It used to be probably between S and A. It was like borderline OP the way you could stack damage up. It has 3 1 second cast. It had Will Dom. You would fire Will Dom into 16 second recharge Char, into TK Blast or Snipe or Strangler. It basically had, and what was the Snipe is like a 1-3-3 animation. So it has 3 really fast attacks, and then you can actually finish with Strangler, and that's not even using your secondary. It has like a crazy versatile chain. You could technically go TK Blast into Strangler and make a 1-2 hit combo if you wanted to try to kill somebody quick. If someone wasn't evading, you could do Wildom Char TK Blast. They would hit in the same like server tick. You could do like Wildom Char Snipe TK and just try to overload them with damage if they weren't evading at all. And Emps just can't heal through that much. Then there was like Wildom Char Snipe Strangler, which again is just a metric ton of damage that Emps can't heal through if you're standing still for it. But they nerfed Wildom for blasters, and it was the best power in the set. It had, I think it was like 151 base damage, which is really high for a 1.0 or 1.1 second animation power. It did have a 20 second recharge, but because of the nature of the set, you were like taking more times on spikes because you were animating so many powers. Like in kickball, you would have probably called it S tier. In 8v8s, you would have probably called it A plus tier. Now with the nerf to Wildom being a tier 1 blast and basically being useless on blasters, would probably call it C tier. But you can still run TK Strangler or Snipe Strangler. Like I said, it falls sort of into those like I guess this is where we have like electric and dark. B to C tier. TK Blast is still decent. And for Corruptors, it kind of has a niche as Corruptors where you can still do Wildom Char TK Blast, but the TK Blast is worse on Corruptors. But it still allows you to do kind of an overload style on 1606 characters. Char is also worse. It has a lot worse recharge, so probably we'll move it down to C tier. I was thinking maybe it would work on Corruptors more so because Wildom didn't get nerfed that way, but it's just there's too many things working against it. Poison, somewhere between A and S for kickball, for organized between A and B. Envenom is really strong because it allows for painting targets, because it has a long duration. It's not great on spikes because it has a slower projectile speed, which means you need to be like right up on the target's grill to get it before like your fast attacks hit, which can give spikes away, which is less than ideal. But at the level we play right now, spikes can get away. There's not too many players that are going to pre-evade. So it probably moves up a little bit, but like realistically, probably B-ish tier. It has no self heal to sustain itself. It does get a double absorb proc in the hold power you drop on the ground because it summons a pseudo pet. So you can slot the defender ATO absorb plus the entomb absorb without actually requiring you to hit a target, which means that you can run like poison dominate with 5 slots instead of giving up a slot for entomb. But like you could do some goofy stuff like power boost weaken emps and just like completely screw them over in kickball where it's less organized. You can be like pretty impactful on it. You just have to watch like survivability wise. It's not the best. It's not as bad as Dominators because you get the double absorb proc built in without, or you don't get it built into your attack chain. You get it like for free. I think like every 25 seconds. So it has more survivability than Dominators, but as far as like attack syncing goes, like spikes and stuff like that, we'll call it B tier. Rad at the highest level, S tier. Invenerating Field is just the best debuff for spike targets. It doesn't give it away. It has a 1.5 second animation, which makes it a little challenging. And what happens is, whenever you activate the power on the person, there's like the initial tether range. But it doesn't show up on their debuff bar until the power fully activates. So you can fire it the better part of like 3/4 of a second early and still have it be perfectly timed on target. And because it's hit scan, you control completely when it happens. The thing with the other single target debuffs right now, like nature and poison, they're projectiles. So if you're further than 90 units away from the target, there's a decent chance that it's going to be late, and like some of the blazes, the bitter ice blast, stuff like that are going to hit before the target's debuffed. Rad doesn't have that problem. The problem in kickball is it animates long. You have like the ideal build for Rad is Rad Water, because it gives you an attack. It gives you a second attack that you can slot Achilles in, so you basically gut someone's resistance. Water has one of the fastest hit times as a follow-up attack. It's basically 4/10 of a second into its animation, but this is a 1.5 into a 1.87. So it's a long time to be spent animating on a 1606 character that doesn't inherently build absorb into its attack chain. Usually you'll have double phase or something like that, and you'll use Spirit Shark Jaws to get your Entomb proc. But you don't get the Defender absorb proc anywhere. But at the highest level, when you have like the full absorb support from an elect, you're doing the 1 minute nature gathers. Rad is S tier. For kickball, we'll call it A tier. I think the nature water plays easier and still does enough debuffs to be relevant for kickball, which I think this is what this list kind of is for, more so than like the highest level. And then Rad is like, you're going to be pressured a lot on Rad. You're going to have really fast reactions, and you need to make sure you don't get yourself caught in animation as often as possible. Also, positioning matters a lot, because if you're not positioning well when you animate the power, or if you're not jump timing your attacks or fly time, or basically fly boosting your attacks, the person can instantly break Rad toggle. So it takes some practice to do. I won't call it the highest skill ceiling or anything like that, but it definitely has a higher skill ceiling than some of the other powers, just because it is a 1.5 animation. Rad Blast, completely mediocre in every way. The snipe is a dot tick. It uniquely allows you to slot the minus res proc and get it on the first tick, and then get all the rest of them to tick up for a bit more damage. But because it's a 1/3/3, it does less damage, and I think it's actually bugged and doing a little less damage than it's intended to, as far as the snipe goes. Cosmic Burst is a 2.07 second animation that makes it pretty bad. Interestingly, as a blaster, you can run a self-contained spike with this. It's not a good spike, it's not a great spike, but it's an okay spike that doesn't require anything from your secondary, and that is Rad Snipe into X-Ray Beam. Because it has an 8-second recharge, it's in the same boat as Dominate for Dominators, the same boat as Water for Dehydrate. It doesn't proc amazing, but it has enough procs where you can, I think, 5 proc it. I think maybe it was only 4 procs. because you don't want to put the blaster ATO proc in that because you don't want to lower its recharge anymore. But for blasters, it has like a niche thing. For defenders and corruptors, it's just not great. It basically has the sniper. That's the only really usable power. The defenders and corruptor version of X-ray beams, even being hit scan like that, it has a 4-second recharge, so it just doesn't proc enough. Char, Char used to be really good. Char used to be A tier, and I said like it works with it works alongside ninjutsu to allow floaty attack into hit scan. So it basically makes more sets viable. But because they upped the recharge to 24 seconds and reduced the range a little bit, I think down to 60, it's just it doesn't enable builds the same way it did before. Because before you had like Beam and Psy weaving Char into their chain because it was a 1 second animation hold, had very little root. It has 16-second recharge, and you could slot 5 procs, including Entomb, in it if you wanted to. So it was a very fluid addition to attack chain. Didn't have a lot of base damage, but it was kind of one of those bleed out things where even if you didn't kill the target in overload status, like in overload spikes, you're looking to run the person out of greens, and then when you can get enough damage to the target where heals just can't save them. So that's kind of the idea of it. Seismic, it's awkward because it kind of falls in the same line of some of the other sets. I guess we won't put it as low as Dark, but it's weird to put it at A tier too. It has minus jump, minus fly built in every attack, which is super annoying. If you're not running fly and evasive maneuvers, it can definitely ground you and limit your movement a good bit, especially when you have a lot of people running them. It gets really annoying, so we'll leave it in A tier. The interesting thing about this set is most of its single target attacks are hit scan, so it allows you to use these floaty attacks as an opener and then have, because like most hit scans seem like they come in epics. There's not as many hit scans in primary attacks across the board, but like this whole set is like it has 2 hit scan attacks. It's Tombstone and whatever the other, like I think Tombstone might be the snipe, and then there's the rad equivalent of the 2.0 second cast. It's definitely kind of better on blasters because you do have a lot of animation time tied up in those powers. It's like 167 for the snipe, and then I think like 2.07 for the tier 3 blast. You can technically run something like this plus like the I said about the nature defender, like nature water. You could technically run like nature seismic and have a similar kind of result as far as like the hit timing goes. But again, it's like this really only works with like ninjutsu. You can't just run, because it used to be you could run just like Char in this, and because the recharge time was low enough on Char, you didn't need ninjutsu. But now this is kind of like a package deal, and some of these sets are package deals. Like the S tiers usually tend to be anyone can use them. These are a little bit more niche, but they're still really good. Like they're if you make those combos, like you'll be a force to be reckoned with. Sonic. I don't know why I grabbed this set. It's because I didn't grab every set, and the idea is if you don't see your set here, it's just not worth bringing. I think its Screech power got changed recently to do a sizable amount of base damage. The problem is it doesn't take any procs, any non-unique procs. So like unique procs would be like your Apocalypse thing where you can only slot one of those across your entire build. A non-unique proc would be Gladjev, range, chance for toxin, where you can slot 5, you can slot as many of those as you want in your build. So Screech is basically taking up all of your procs, but it is I think it's like a 1.5 second alpha attack with decently fast projectile speed. And it does like some minus res, but it's just like it's not great. Shout's bad. Shout's still bad. The set doesn't take procs anywhere, so you can't really proc it out or anything like that. It's only good for one attack, and that's what you find in like sets like Energy, Elect Blast, things like that. Like they have one good attack you can use, and sometimes you can pair it up with blasters who have more versatility for follow-up attacks. But usually you just want to avoid them. Sonic manipulation. I'll probably say B tier just because it's a little bit better than some of these. It has the unique property of having a lead in attack. So most blaster secondaries that we use have a finisher attack. It has the hit scan attack. Sonic has a 90 projectile speed hold, so you get a lot of procs out of it. The problem with it is it's a 167 opener attack. Now, if you played Old Beam, yeah, it still roots more than Old Beam, but it has the same animation time as the Snipe. So if you were getting Penetrating Ray Lancer Shot off, you can get Sonic plus whatever follow up. This is a build enabler kind of thing. It allows you to run a lot of different primary attacks within the blasters because anything that has hit scan like water, seismic, Psy Blast is almost fast enough for it with TK Blast. Things like that. It allows you to fire a decent damage. I think it's like 130 base damage, which is above average. 5 proc hold into a hit scan attack. It has an absorb shield on its regeneration style power, so that makes it stronger than some of the other ones like your ninjutsu for survivability, so you're still decently tanky. And I think it gives you like smashing and energy resistance. So like it helps it out like if you want to try to run hibernate and fly on a build without being devices. Because like hibernate for blasters is definitely worse. You don't get a res shield in it. You get I think it's like fire, cold, and toxin resist. So you need to build some res up somewhere else if you want to run blaster hibernate. So yeah, Sonic will say B tier. It's okay. It enables a couple blaster builds to be viable. It's not good because it's a 167 cast. Ideally, you want your first attack to be a 1.0, 1.1 at the most. Yeah. Onwards to the other Sonic things. The set that everyone says that made I-12 so good. Running double Sonics and cages and all that kind of stuff. Don't bother bringing it. It's really bad. It has a cage. It has res shields. You get res shields from nature when you gather. Yeah, you can apply them as well with this, but it's like a 60-second gap. And you can kind of slam yourself into the res DR cap with like that many natures gathering. Like, because it's just like 2 nature buffs is like, I think almost like 30+% res to all. And it is universal res to all. These still don't have psi res. They've never gotten with the times. The single target debuff is decent value. It's minus 30%, but it's worse than rad. It's a projectile. It has a longer animation. Just a bad power set all around. Unless these two power sets get like grantable absorb shields, like you're not gonna see them ever be useful. Spirit Ward, I have this in here just because there's a couple pool powers. Like I said, jaunt, fly. I think I have super jump here too. It's just like you want on every build possible. This is definitely more of a support power, but it's the support power that makes you from, if you're just running an emp with jaunt, you're decent. If you're running an emp with Spirit Ward, you're top tier. Like you provide an extra level of mitigation to people who are being pressured. You give them more effective hit points, and that is like the most important thing in City of Heroes is your max hit points. Rather than like the amount that you can actually heal. So giving a person 2,600 hit points versus being able to heal them for 1,200, getting them closer to 2,600 hit points is going to be more valuable than the bigger heal. Figuring out what targets to put this on and when to put them on it is always good. This is usually a player by player basis. Like some players who play very tight and centralized, especially target callers, make good candidates for this, or just certain players in general who play very in the kind of offensive cloud make good use of this because they're not going to break toggle as much for you. People who play very much on the outside or who get lost often, this is just wasted animation. But even then, like people who don't jaunt also or don't react, it does give a little extra breathing room. It kind of covers mistakes a little bit. Also, it comes with fly and teleport in a single power set, so that makes it really, really good for movement, getting around. You're not going to take it in most offensive builds, But I think if we got to that level where you could play tight like that, it could be really good. But still, for supports, it's like S tier. Storm, C tier. It has Hurricane. Maybe maps like Outbreak, running a couple storms can be useful, but the way most people play now on the like we play like bigger maps for the most part. I mean, Skyway's not that big, but it's like it's just harder to tag people with Storm, and you have no self heal. You're squishy. You're a big target with the big Hurricane running around. The minus range and minus to hit is viable in like the 5 proc meta. Like to hit buffs do actually matter somewhat, especially if you're not nature gathering all the time, or your nature buffs fall off. But still, it's pretty low tier as far as things go. The only power that matters in this is pretty much Hurricane. The heal isn't really doing much. Freezing Rain is like if you want to like throw it on top of someone's Hyber, sure they get like another 30-second debuff, but it's not like nothing that's really like screaming for you to bring this. Super Jump, S tier. Between this and Kin, you can like negate minus jump powers. Between this and IR, I should say. But on its own, like you need the jump to at least resist web powers, and it's the best way to get around. Combat jumping plus super jump at the same time is really good. Acrobatics reduces the durations of holds by a significant amount. So even if they do manage to break through your clear mind through enough mez stacking, like the acrobatics is still going to be on and give you some mez resistance. Every build should have it. Every build should have combat jumping, super jump, and acrobatics. Tack blasters, tack arrow. I almost want to put it in don't bother, but it still has web grenade, which I don't know if I mentioned with. I think I did it with devices, but it still has web grenade. It has glue arrow. I don't even know. I don't think glue arrow works the same way anymore, so it's even worse. But it literally has. It has to hit buff resistance, and it has maybe some like inherent accuracy. Gymnastics doesn't give you the mini IR it used to. It's just really bad all around. Like they kind of gutted that set. But it still has the web arrow, and web arrows are still annoying. So like at the lowest level, it's like moderately annoying. But just as a blaster, you're better off running devices over this any day of the week. So unless you're really hard up for that concept, run devices instead of this. Thermal doesn't do enough healing. The minus N debuff doesn't really matter that much, especially on like 1-2 spike teams. Like when you're running like defenders who get vigilance, like they get a massive N discount as it is. Emps have 2 absorb pains or pain bringers to pass around. If you're running elect, they have a power on like a 7 or 8 second recharge that gives you like 50 endurance. So like a single therm is never gonna like sap anyone in a viable 8v8 meta. The res shields still don't have psi res, so it's kind of down there with Sonic in as far as like keeping res shields up, and nature just gives res to all it gathers, so why bother? The single target heal is the same as empathy and pain on defenders. So it's like it's like another heal other you can throw. It's like a weird. I mean, you could kind of play it as a weird hybrid sort of, but it's not great. It's not good. It's probably don't bother, but we'll leave it at don't bother. Time time doesn't really bring anything good for PvP. It has the single target hold that does no base damage. So even if you proc it, it just doesn't do enough. Like you ideally want your holds to do about 110 minimum base damage. So it doesn't have that. Its single target buff is like it's not as good as Fort. Its AoE buffs, the plus defense, plus to hit, and plus recharge, plus N plus healing, I believe, that decays over time, aren't as good as nature. Most people are building in high recharge into their builds, and especially if you're running kin, you're getting at least 50% on top of that. So like this buff becomes redundant. Basically, time, while it's solid in PvE about doing a lot of everything in PvP, because its res debuff is AoE and on a long recharge. It has no good gather buffs. It has no good single target buffs. It's just kind of whatever. Don't bother. Like, it doesn't bring anything to the table. I think same goes for temporal blasters. I didn't put them in here. I think I remember I said if you don't see the build you want to play in here, it's probably just not worth it at all. Water. Water's the sleeper. It has 2 hit scan attacks similar to Earth. It procs, I think, better than Seismic, not Earth. In the sense it can slot more procs. You can basically slot 4 procs in Water Jet and 5 procs in. You can probably like slot 8 procs in Dehydrate, but you still want some accuracy. The downside with it is on defenders, you're kind of left with low accuracy on Dehydrate, so you're hoping you have some to hit buffs from nature. I think Water Nature is still one of the strongest characters for kickball PvP, but it falls off at like higher levels to Rad. Water allows you like finisher attacks. The problem with this set is both its good attacks are hit scan. So if Water Jet wasn't hit scan, you could do Water Jet Dehydrate and have it be on par with Fire Blast. It would probably be even a little bit better than Fire Blast because it procs better, but it doesn't. What happens is water is hit scan, but it also fires very early into its animation, which means that when you fire off Dehydrate or when you fire off Water Jet, it hits about 4/10 of a second into its animation. Whereas Blaze, if you're firing from reasonable range, it's going to be 1.7 to like 2.3, 2.4 seconds. So it's like it just hits too fast. But the advantage of it is you can slot the Achilles in here, and that's where you have your Rad Water combo, where you're slotting Achilles into Dehydrate, and you're debuffing them with EF, and because you can fire EF early, you can fire Dehydrate earlier into your chain, and still basically get the debuff off before your Blazes or Bitter Ice Blast hit. If we could get the devs to change Water Jet from hit scan to a 90 projectile speed, this would be like hands down just the best set in the game. And it would be like, it would compete with Fire. It has better recharge than Fire. Fire is 10-second blaze into a 12-second blazing bolt. Dehydrate is a 10-second Water Jet into an 8-second Dehydrate. And having that second power recharge at that speed means you can go pretty fast as far as spike pacing goes. The downsides, and then also Dehydrate like heals you. It actually heals up tick damage. So like a Water Nature who like occasionally pops his heal off and has Dehydrate woven into their chain gets an insane amount of healing over time. So they require less babysitting from Emps topping them off. Like, as an Emp, like if you have like a Water Nature out there, like even if they're at 70% hit points and they fired both their heals, they're gonna tick themselves up and you don't actually have to go chase them. So it's really nice. The problem with the set is it's a 1.5 second animation, which is on the upper end. Like you can technically do 1.67 on the first attack, but 1.33 and below I think is ideal. 1.0 is like perfect world. 1.33, it's okay. 1.5, you're getting to be a little long. 1.67, it feels clunky. So water is at least not 167, and Dehydrate, again, it's a 187 cast for a 1606. It's so good of an attack, though, that it's still kind of worth it. Like, ideally, yeah, I mean, like, Bitter Ice Blast Dominate was better because it's 2 1-second casts, and it does a truckload of damage. But, like, for what we have now, this one fits a lot of bills. But it just doesn't quite make the self-contained set. But running it as a debuffer into Dehydrate is really good. Interestingly, you can run, whenever you hit the build-up, you can run Water Jet as a spike. It doesn't hit clean, but because they hit they both instances of damage hit before the 2.2 second mark. So a target could technically pop greens for the first instance because it happens so fast, but as people get out of greens, it can be a later match spike that's viable before an MP heal will get in. So it's a weirdly versatile set that has like some higher level niches to it, but it's just not quite there at S tier quite yet. I think this is Trick Arrow. Still kind of annoying. We're gonna put it in C tier just because devices is better right now. Trick Arrow has some like newer buffs that are more potent, but I think their duration got nerfed down quite a bit. Glue Arrow got nerfed. That's used to be the reason why you would run it over devices, is you would web arrow someone, and then as they're grounded, you would throw glue arrow in a populated area, and then people would invariably run through it. As some people have gotten more vertical, it gets less value, and now glue arrow just doesn't work that way. So it's pretty bad. And it also, as a disruption role, it doesn't really work now because the team with a 6-person offense is going to be much stronger than a team with a 5-person offense and a trick arrow running around trying to web people. Webbing people between targets or doing it as an extra thing is the best way to do it, but you're probably going to be a target for yourself. You're very squishy. You have no self-sustain or anything like that. You have no easy double absorb proc. I guess you could technically double absorb proc the hold arrow, and it does do some nasty debuffs now, so that might be semi-viable, similar to poison, but it's not great. I think it's definitely worse than poison. Beam used to be like solidly A tier. It was an overload style damage set, but whenever the root changes went through that normalized the roots across the board, Beam went from basically having built-in Cray Pistol to now animating closer to what it should animate at. So it drops down. I mean, I guess kind of B tier. Like penetrating Ray Lancer shot from the right distance still hits a 1-2 hit at around, I think, the 2.4 second mark. A little long for heals, but it's still a metric ton of damage. The problem with Beam being you need a Beam team to make Beam work well. Beam gets an extra attack whenever the target's disintegrating, so it has multiple working parts. Ideally, you would have like maybe like a rad Beam running EF Lancer Shot, or even just like EF Dehydrate still for the extra minus res. You would have one of your natures be a Beam Corruptor, and they would run Disintegration Lancer, and then the rest of your blasters are running Penetrating Ray Lancer, or if you're going for overload, or like the idea to know when to overload, you can do Char P-Ray Lancer, and yeah, you basically do more damage than anyone can possibly heal to, and you can create some like pretty narrow spikes whenever the damage syncs up, but it's a 1/6/7 into a 1/9 attack, so it's even worse than like Water and Sonic. A lot of follow-ups for that goes, and Penetrating Ray is a bad player trap because I think it's a reasonable projectile speed, but because its base range is 150, you can technically fire it from further away, and it means it's going to hit much, much later. Most targets, like you're chasing in with your standard 90-foot range, sometimes you use a 60-foot range alpha like Char or the Sonic thing, and then you're firing it into a hit scan with 80-foot base range. But because you have 150 base range on your first attack, you can get stuck into that trap of firing the snipe from too far away and then having it hit like at the 4 or 5 second mark. So Beam's pretty bad right now. It's also bad because you need everyone running Beam on your team to make it like decent, and it's just a high damage set. It doesn't create a great spike. It has long animation. It has longer root times. It's just, eh. I will say don't bother with it because you could technically still make it workable. Cold. There's too much slow resist. Like if you're running Kin, I think you get some slow resistance there. You have 2 adrenaline boost, where they can basically counter whoever you heat loss unless you heat loss a gather. That can be pretty potent. The shields don't do anything. Benumb is like, it's like a slightly worse poison because it doesn't have the single target res debuff, and Envenom and Weaken are easier to apply and keep up on more targets more frequently. This is basically if you want to try to bully someone a little bit in kickball and make their lives miserable, which why would you? Because it's just a casual match. But if you're really hung up on playing a cold, you could bring it and do a little something extra on it. It's not amazing, it's not good, it's not great. And the fact that you get like a decent amount of free slow resist built into your build just from set bonus, you're not even trying, you know. And I think you can get 100% slow res, and it just means slows don't affect you because it's actually a percentage resistance versus the actual plus and minus like a lot of the other things are. Sleet is a bad minus res power because it's a patch thing, and heat loss has a really low uptime. So yeah, that's a borderline don't bother, but you could technically put it in C tier. Yeah, so that's about what things look like right now for current COH PvP. S tier means you're always going to want some of those, or you're going to want to take these powers. Fire is just there because you don't necessarily need fire, but it's the most versatile set across different archetypes or the main range damage archetypes. Blasters and corruptors because you're running natures, and blasters because you're having more attacks. It's just the set to go because it has Blazing Bolt as a self-contained spike that hits prior to the 2.2 second mark, and then you can run things like Blaze Dominate as an alternate spike or Blaze Strangler, and still have them sync up really well and do a ton of damage. Corruptor Blaze is pretty weak. Blaster Blaze isn't half bad. But yeah, as a corruptor, you'll definitely do less damage, like where ice actually pretty much slams for corruptors. Defenders, Fire Blast is kind of bad for, but again, defenders you're usually running as a debuffer, so you're running like corrosive enzymes, Envenom, or EF. So like that's your first attack as a defender, so you're not worried about Blaze. And then there's just better follow-ups than Blazing Bolt, because Blazing Bolt again only takes it takes three procs. Snipe, Apocalypse, and Glad Jav for defenders. So it's like only okay. And because it's 450 projectile speed, it actually makes it a little awkward for some of the, like, poison is 1.5, and rad is 1.5. So it's actually a little too slow. Like Blazing Bolt needs to hit into about a 1 second cast, which you could technically do it for nature, but again, it has a 12-second recharge on Blazing Bolt, so it doesn't quite sync up with the spikes. So that's where things are. You want to see these pretty much everywhere. These you can bring and be pretty much viable. You can make viable builds. These are like build enablers and are kind of like niche things that you can do, but still like not be detrimental. These are, I don't really care if my team wins or loses. I just kind of want to have some fun on playing something. You're not actively adding, but you'll do enough damage where you're just not an active detriment if you do like the other things well, like lock on targets, be vocal, hide, phase, jaunt, manage your greens, you know, try not to tank damage. Like you can still do these and be successful. It's just you're not playing what is more optimal. And these like you just want to avoid. And if you don't see your power set on here, like I think I use this for masterminds. This is all masterminds. Just assume it's not worth it. You know, there's like some weird niche cases you might be able to work something out, like Scrapper Snipes being like borderline broken for their damage, but it's just, I wouldn't bother. I would learn to play one of these characters well, because if you play one of these characters well, then you can mess around on the other stuff later. But if you're trying to play something that's objectively worse and harder, you're going to have a harder time building yourself up to the point where you know what's good and what's not. But this is really long, so hopefully you guys got something out of it and can figure some stuff out from there. Look forward to seeing you at Kickball if you show up. Bring a good attitude, and hopefully one of these characters that help people out. All right, later.